This week we're going to focus on that shot in Rebellion where we reveal the whole Stormtrooper army. There are various techniques to doing this, and we're going to show you a couple of them now using HitFilm Pro. Let's do this! The first thing we'll need is a Stormtrooper model. So I just went over to Google, typed in Stormtrooper 3D model, and downloaded the first one I could find for this tutorial. I actually selected this one off tf3dm.com. It was the first model in the list. Easy to download, and it was an OBJ, so it will work well in HitFilm. Once I'd uncompressed that model, I just went into HitFilm and selected to import the 3D model. Now, because it was an OBJ and it had the materials and everything set up, it just worked straight away. Then I created a new comp just with the default settings for this project, which is 1080p, 25 frames a second. I dragged the Stormtrooper onto the comp, and then I went to the new layer button and added a camera. This moves the entire thing into the 3D space. Next, we want to make sure that our Stormtrooper is actually standing on the floor rather than kind of halfway through it as he is at the moment. So we go into the Stormtrooper object, we go into the model, and then into the Stormtrooper object itself. We change the middle anchor point up so that the feet are sitting on the floor level. Unfortunately, he's got black feet, so we can't really see them. So I'm going to change the background color to some kind of gray. And then we'll see the soles of the feet. Yeah, it just needs to be moved up a little bit more so it's standing on that red floor line. Our Stormtrooper appears to be absolutely massive. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the world transform and scale it down to just 20%. And now, because we've moved that anchor point, it's going to scale the height of the Stormtrooper with the feet being the reference point. Next, I'm going to select the orbit tool and actually change the camera position so we have a better view of what we're doing. Now I'm going to create a plane, and I'm actually going to make this a square plane because it will make some of the things we're doing in the future a bit easier, and I'm going to make it mid-grey. Now I'm going to drag this onto the timeline, 2 copies of it actually, below our Stormtrooper. The bottom copy I'm going to rename to background. The one above the background I'm going to rename to floor. Then I'm going to change that layer to be a 3D plane. And here we can see it's standing upright behind our Stormtrooper. So we want to go into the transform controls and change the rotation X to 90 so it's sitting on our floor. I'm then going to switch off the grid in the viewer because it's a bit distracting, and we're going to recreate that ourselves by adding a grid effect to this floor layer. I'm going to change the settings in the grid effect so that point 1 is 0, 0 and point 2 is 20 by 20. Now this grid is far too thick, so I'm going to change the border radius down to 0.5. There we go, our floor is complete. Now there are several ways we can duplicate our Stormtrooper, and the most simple of those is to duplicate the model itself. To do this, select the Stormtrooper layer, go into the Models section, and then select the Stormtrooper itself. We can now right-click on this and select Duplicate. Now, making sure that we have the selection tool selected in the viewer, we can just drag this selected new copy of the Stormtrooper over to one side. Here we go, we have 2. I'm just going to move the camera in so we can see a little bit better. Now we can select both of these and duplicate again, and now move these, and we've got 4. Do the whole lot again, move them a little bit behind these ones. Now we've got 8. Now this is great and it works well, but it makes it very time consuming to build up 100 Stormtroopers and then decide that maybe you want to offset them slightly from the grid or make some variations. So we do have other ways of doing this. What I'll do first is clean up what I've got. I'm going to delete all the additional Stormtroopers I created, so I've just got my one original Stormtrooper again. I'm now going to set him to invisible and go and get the particle simulator. Make sure you drag this on above the floor layer. Can't see anything, so skip forward a second or so you can see the particles. Here they are, kind of all over the place. This is not what we want. So we're going to go across to the emitter section, and under emitter and shape, we're going to change the shape to be a quad. And then we're going to attach that to the floor layer. And here you'll see the quad actually aligning with our floor, but the particles are still going everywhere. So we're now going to change the size so that we've got more space for our Stormtroopers. Let's try 600. Actually, maybe that's a little bit small, so we'll go up to 800. I'll just reposition the camera a little bit so I can see more of the quad that I've created. But as you can see, the particles are still everywhere. So we're going to change this to a grid emitter, and you'll see below that our grid is 10 by 10. That's important to remember. But the particles are still everywhere. So what we need to do is stop them moving. To do this, we need to go into the particle system and go to the movement section. Here, we're going to increase the life of the particles to, say, 30 seconds, but we're going to change the speed to 0. Here they go. They're sitting on the grid exactly like we want them to, but there isn't enough. So we're going to need to increase the number of particles. The clue to how many we need is in that grid X and Y. So if we go into the general section here, just expand this out so you can see it a little bit better. This is the particles per second property. So what we're going to do here is go back to the start of our animation, the very first frame, and set the particles per second to 100, because that is the size of our grid, 10 times 10 in particles. On that first frame, we're going to set a keyframe and set it to 100. We're then going to move forward just one frame and set it to 0, so they stop generating after one frame. We are then going to go back up to the top of this layer and find the general section and time shift it back 1 second. So all 100 of those particles will have been generated before they even come into view. And there you have it. We have all of our particles laid out exactly like we want, but they don't look like Stormtroopers. So what do? We go to the appearance section, change it to the layer, and change the source to the Stormtrooper layer. And all of a sudden, we have 100 Stormtroopers. And this is a very efficient way of us rendering the Stormtroopers, so it's very, very quick. And we can rotate around and see them all standing there. Fantastic. We've made a Stormtrooper army. But there's very little variation in these Stormtroopers. In fact, there is none. So what can we do? We can go to the movement variation section. Now you need to be very subtle here, but if you add, say, 1 degree to the X, Y, and Z rotation, and maybe offset the first and last properties in the center of mass by maybe 5, then it means that all the Stormtroopers will be subtly different, standing at different orientations and different angles like we have here. None of these lines are perfectly straight. So fantastic, you've now generated 100 Stormtroopers, but what if you want more? A lot more. Well, actually this method is so fast, you can easily have, say, 400 Stormtroopers. So let's try that. Let's make the width and height much larger. Let's go for 2,500 in both cases. We can't really see this, so we're going to need to zoom out and reposition our camera a little bit. We've all got big spaces in between them at the moment because we're not generating enough particles. But let's make the grid 20 by 20, so double what we had before. And then we want to go down to our particles per second. We want to up that to 400 because 20 times 20 is 400. There you go. We've got a huge number of Stormtroopers now, about 400 of them. And it's still very, very fast. But you can actually push this far further. I'm on an iMac here, so hardly the most powerful machine in the world, but let's try 8,000 by 8,000 as our dimensions. And we'll up this to 50 by 50, which means 2,500 Stormtroopers. And there we go. It's still thoroughly workable. I might have made too many Stormtroopers. This is looking ridiculous. I think I will just go back to the 400. But as you can see, you could use this technique for all sorts of things. So it could be tanks rather than Stormtroopers, or aeroplanes. And you can use these movement variation settings to create subtle changes like we have here, or really, really massive changes in movement over time, which might be much more interesting for, say, a space battle or something like that. I hope you found this tutorial really interesting. Please do consider subscribing, and we'll see you next week.